Welcome everybody to the Storytime channel. My name is Steven, and today we have some pro-revenge stories. Our first story of the day is by Barbecue and Heck. You demand we work overtime for free? Enjoy trying to open the store with no employees. I've met Grumpy in Narcotics Anonymous. He volunteered there after they helped him and became my sponsor. Seeing that I was trying to get my crap together, he offered me my first job out of high school. Grumpy was the manager of a store for a company that sold everything you needed to build a house, from cement and bricks to custom-made cupboards. I started as a loader, filling the trucks that were making deliveries. A little background for the company, it plays an important part for later. When they started, back in the early 80s, they sold everything you needed to build a brick-and-mortar home wholesale to professionals. During their first expansion, they got a really good reputation for their prices of power tools, custom cupboards, and landscaping, including custom-made garden furnitures. The stores were basically big warehouses. In mid-90s, they opened their doors to the general public, which, accompanied by a rising tent of DIY, skyrocketed their sales. That brought a second, smaller wave of expansion and the opening of the online store, first only with phone orders and later with a proper site. When I joined, they were doing a third shift on their business plan. They had cut down on things that weren't a big seller, like bricks and concrete, and were focusing more on the big sellers: custom-made furniture, landscaping, tools, and, for some weird reason, plumbing. My first 8 months on the job was a dream. Grumpy was an excellent manager. Having started in the company roughly the same age I was and being promoted through the ranks, he had developed a very distinct managerial style. His concept was simple. If my employees are happy, they work better and provide better services, which leads to better sales. That meant that while Grumpy managed one of the inner city stores, meaning medium to small size compared to others, we were fourth in revenue nationwide and first in customer happiness. And then the reason for his nickname Stroke. While everyone called him Grumpy, a nickname he was kind of proud of, he was far from it. The reason was he had a medical condition that affected his nerves and had left him with a permanent frown on his face. He had declined promotion due to that condition, knowing the extra stress would make his condition flare up, meaning he wouldn't be as effective as he would like. His medical condition flared up unexpectedly, and Grumpy had to be hospitalized and be on sick leave for a time. HQ decided not to have one of Grumpy's assistants be an acting manager for the duration, but bring in a regional manager to take over the store for the duration. Let's call him Wilhelm. Wilhelm was the exact opposite of Grumpy. He was younger than Grumpy. He was in his late 20s, Grumpy was in his late 30s, had a business degree, and he hadn't worked the floor at all. He was hired from the beginning as an office drone and climbed his way to regional manager. The reason he was put in charge of our store had to do with the change of the business plan of the company. You see, the change of focus had created a lot of empty space in the stores. A supermarket chain had approached the company with an offer to rent the empty space, especially for inner city stores. The company had accepted and placed regional managers in key stores to help with integration. The thing is, the supermarket chain had a reputation of being bad employers. That was reinforced by one of our tellers, who had worked for them for 3 years before quitting to join us. Wilhelm didn't help also. His managerial style was based in only one concept: make more money in any way possible. He started by changing our schedule from monthly to weekly, raising the sales targets to unrealistic heights, and always demanded more. In the first 2 weeks, 6 experienced people had left, 4 quit and 2 fired, and replaced by young, inexperienced people that were easier to manipulate. And then the integration happened. The floor was the first to feel the problem. The supermarket opened its doors and was understaffed. Wilhelm started sending people over to help for 4 to 6 hours, while also demanding to work their regular shifts. If someone declined, he or she was written up. 2 write-ups in 6 months, and you were fired. Then Wilhelm came to lay the law in the loading bay. The loading bay was shared between the 2 stores. Wilhelm declared that we had first helped the 2 guys of the supermarket unload their trucks first because their products were perishable, and then started loading our own trucks. That would throw our delivery schedule to the wind. The loading crew worked 5 to 13. We loaded the first trucks that had longer to travel, so they will be ready to leave at 7 at the latest. The company had a next day delivery policy for a 150 miles radius. What Wilhelm declared meant we couldn't start loading our trucks before 7:30, and they couldn't start their route before 9:30. We said as much, but Wilhelm didn't care. He said we had to do both jobs. When someone inquired about overtime, Wilhelm said no. He said we already made too much money with unsocial hours, 5 to 8, and leaving early, so he wouldn't approve overtime. So, from a nice environment that you wanted to work for, we all started getting miserable. We lost 10 people in the loading crew in a month because of the new rules. The new hires didn't last long. The floor was a mess also. Started turning personnel faster than a dollar hooker. Anyone who is staying is either looking for another job, is afraid of unemployment, or is too young to know better. The sales had a very small decline, but customer happiness is plummeting fast. After almost 6 months, all the old guard that was left was ready to quit. But our savior came back. Almost 6 months from the day he was hospitalized, Grumpy walks in the store to claim his rightful position. He is in a knight in shining armor, riding a pure white horse, carrying a legendary sword. He's in a normal attire, slightly limping and holding a cane. We have a welcome back party and have a small glimmer of hope now that he's back. We are informed that Grumpy will be on light duties for 2 weeks before he becomes the manager again. Despite Grumpy being back, Wilhelm still remains the regional manager, which means he outranks Grumpy and makes it very clear in private meetings with all of us. If he caught us complaining to Grumpy, we were as good as gone. Still, a few of us are planning to have a meeting with Grumpy after the weeks, letting him get his sea legs back, but another department had other ideas. During his reign of terror, the only department that Wilhelm couldn't control was the workshop. He knew that if he treated them as bad as he did to us, they would quit and the sales would go from a small decline to bottom of the barrel real quick. As I said, custom-made furniture was the #1 seller. So the head carpenter has a meeting with Grumpy on his second day talking about the future of the workshop. In reality, the guy spilled the beans on Wilhelm. With the pretext of catching up with the changes, Grumpy has meetings with everyone, learning what Wilhelm had done and why we had so many new staff. You could feel he was getting angrier with every meeting. He also had an eye-opening meeting with the manager of the supermarket. Finally, the time had come that he is the manager again. The revenge. On his first day back as a manager, Grumpy notifies everyone of a mandatory meeting after the store is closed. He has a solution, so we gather in the store after closing hours, and Grumpy lays out the plan. For the next couple of days, nobody except him is coming to the store. If anyone calls us, we should direct them to him, which we did when we started getting calls about the store being closed. Grumpy's answer to the HQ was simple. The staff was working on a second job during their shifts, which is a breach of contract, so I had to fire them all and find new staff. That caught HQ's attention because nothing of the sort was reported in the past 6 months. They asked Grumpy for evidence, which he happily provided with our written testimonies, which brought a crap storm on Wilhelm. You see, Wilhelm had an arrangement with the supermarket manager. He got a kickback from our unpaid labor for the supermarket, and the manager offered the same thing to Grumpy. He also included that Wilhelm regularly declined to sign overtime, which meant that if any one of us went to the labor department, the company would get a really huge fine. The aftermath, Wilhelm quickly got fired. We all received calls to interview with the company for an open position. We all received severance pay for our firing, plus most of the unpaid overtime, about 80% of it. Almost all of us went back to work with a small pay raise based on experience. The company took a long, hard look on the supermarket chain and distanced themselves from them. They stayed until their lease was over, but no shared employees anymore, and a lot of theirs jumped ship to our side. Next time Grumpy had to take time off, one of his assistants took over. 2 did a stellar job, leading to be promoted to managers in other stores. Grumpy brought back his usual managerial style, leading again to a rise of sales and customer happiness. I left the job 3 years later for a better paying position, but I still remember Grumpy as one of the best managers I ever had. Do you guys personally find it a little disappointing that Wilhelm more or less got away with it, only getting fired after the fact? Or do you think the outcome was satisfying enough? Let me know in the comments down below. And our final story of the day is by KTB 1962. Act like a jerk in the middle seat? Get arrested. After seeing another post about a middle seat a-hole, it reminded me of what happened back in 2004, and this is unintentional pro-revenge on my part. This happened on a flight back after dropping my mother-in-law off at home. She was in her 80s and didn't like flying alone, so I, whenever she visited with my wife and me, ended up flying down to pick her up and flying back with her to take her home. I liked earning the miles, plus I enjoyed it a lot because I genuinely adored my mother-in-law. Anyway, I had the aisle seat, which I always book, and the guy in the middle seat, who was there before me, refused to move his leg and kept his arm on the armrest. I get in my seat, but he's really pushing back hard. It feels like he's basically trying to take over the entire row. I'm pushing back too, but refuse to continue to this the entire flight, even though it's barely a 75-minute flight. As the flight attendant walked by prior to liftoff, I purposely commented loud enough for her to hear, "Dude, stop trying to play footsie with me, I'm not interested." He got all flustered and moved a little bit, though not a lot. Fast forward to just after takeoff, seatbelt sign is turned off and they're getting ready to serve drinks. Now he's spreading out again, but even more than before. I unhooked my belt and jumped out of my seat and yelled at him to stop touching me. Flight attendant and the air marshal rush up to me as quickly as they could to see what was going on, while he's trying to form words. I tell them he keeps rubbing his leg against me and won't stop even after I tell him to. Before this guy could respond, the passenger in the window seat says he's rubbing up against him too. He gets taken out of the middle seat, protesting the whole time. He sat down in a jump seat with the marshal next to him. The flight attendant comes back to me and the guy by the window and offers us a free alcoholic drink for our inconvenience. We both accept gladly. Free beer is always a good thing. About 20 minutes before the flight is supposed to land, the marshal comes back to me and asks if I want to press charges. I seriously thought about doing it, but said no. I'm just glad he's not next to me and pushing up against me. The guy in the window seat said the same, and figured that was that. After the flight landed and we had exited the plane, I see the middle seat guy in cuffs and a couple of cops talking to the flight attendant. The air marshal saw me standing there and walked over to me. I asked him what happened. He said the guy called the flight attendant a witch and a few other choice words, and she was pressing assault charges against him because he did make a threat of bodily harm. He asked me again if I wanted to press charges, and again I told him no. The guy's already in enough trouble. As I walked away, I looked at the idiot and started laughing. Maybe next time, he'll just move. I didn't want him arrested. I just wanted him to stop being a jerk. He's the one who decided to make it worse for himself. Edit to clarify, this wasn't an armrest fight, though he certainly took those over. He kept spreading his legs wider, pushing up against me. Also, I asked the guy to make some room before I sat down, but got ignored. There's manspreading, and then there's this guy who decides that he's going to demand as much legroom as possible by completely spreading out. Like, that almost reaches weird territory. It's like you're on a flight, why do you need your legs that wide open? I thought what the guy did sucked, but I probably wouldn't have pressed charges either. Like it was discussed, it was the own guy's fault for being a total jerk and getting himself landed in some cuffs. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So if you have a favorite story of the day, let me know which story and why in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you haven't, subscribe and turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video. No matter what you do, whether it's just viewing the video, liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, I appreciate the heck out of it. Every little thing that you do helps the channel grow that much more, and I can't thank you enough for it. So until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll be right here next time on the Storytime channel.